This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Hello there. Hundreds of Iraqis are flooding back to their country, but the American military is warning the refugees not to return home. A military spokesman in the country says Iraq simply can't cope with large numbers of people returning. That's pretty somber news for the 2.5 million Iraqis the UN says has fled the country. And it coincides with a new appeal for money by the Red Cross just in the last few hours. John Cookson is in Iraq. He takes a look at the plight of those who need that money the most.
This neighborhood of Baghdad is called Seven Palaces. But these refugees don't live in one. They barely have a roof on their dilapidated shelter. More than 100 men, women and children eke out an existence at this camp after fleeing from Diyala province. Just a handful of the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who are displaced in their own country. This man says, "We were under pressure from Al-Qaeda. They shot at us. They used mortars and snipers. We were completely surrounded. We escaped by fleeing across the river by boats." Winter has arrived in Iraq and temperatures plunge at night. This mother says, "We get no help from the Iraqi government. They don't seem to want to know or to care. I call on the government," she says, "to come and see us, see the children in this miserable situation." Iraq is struggling to cope with its displaced and returning refugees who are putting added strain on resources. And there was a warning from the UN Special Representative that security here could still deteriorate, putting returning families in danger.
It is in the front of the eyes of everyone that Iraq is not Switzerland. There is still an improvement, we all recognize that. And it's a substantial improvement, especially in certain areas, but the situation is fragile. It could become worse.
But what of internally displaced? The ones who told us they feel abandoned by the government. I put their plight to the minister responsible. He admitted progress was slow, but he said they would be taken care of and should be able to go home in due course.
I think they not return quickly, but they return step by step. Most of them, they will return. I think we must facilitate everything in order to get quick returns for them.
Iraq has already allocated more than $100 million to help refugees, and the United Nations has pledged a further 11 million. These are large amounts of money, but it's very clear it's not reaching those who need it most quickly enough. John Cookson, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
The city of Abu Ghraib and the areas around it were the most dangerous areas in Baghdad because a great deal of violence and killings happened there. This explains why the city was called Iraq's Kandahar, or the trap of death. Now, however, the security situation there has changed after local armed groups formed what is known as Baghdad Brigade in order to establish security and eliminate Al-Qaeda's presence there. More details with Abdul Qadir Al-Sadi.
One has been accustomed to killings, violence and destruction in the city of Abu Ghraib and its suburbs since the American occupation forces entered the city. In most cases, many of the groups that were responsible for the violence were working underground. These groups were brutal in the way they treated the residents of Abu Ghraib, which explains why local Iraqi factions rebelled against these groups. The Iraqi factions include the 1920 20th Brigades, the Rashidin Army, the Mujahideen Army, and the Islamic Army.
These factions united to fight Al-Qaeda. The fight began with the establishment of what was known as the Awakening. These factions continued to fight against Al-Qaeda.
It appears that they have been able to enforce their control over most of the western parts of Baghdad. All the participating Iraqi factions united under the Baghdad Brigade, which was backed by the American forces. The number of armed men fighting within this brigade is 4,000, but their relationship with the government has not been resolved yet. It seems that their attempts were focused on securing the area so that the displaced Iraqis could return to their homes.
It was extremely dangerous for people to come here, so we joined the Baghdad Brigade. As a result, the area has become safe, as you can see. The people can now visit. We secured the area between Al-Radwaniyah and Abu Ghraib.
The Baghdad Brigade played a large role in the military operations, which achieved what the American army failed to do. Now anyone can walk freely in areas deep inside western Baghdad, like Abu Ghraib, Zidan, Al-Radwaniyah, and Kandahar, which was not possible for many years. Iraq's Kandahar, or the Trap of Death, in western Baghdad has now become relatively more secure, but the Iraqi government and the United States must maintain the logistical and financial support. From Abu Ghraib area, western Baghdad, Abdul Qadir Saadi, Al-Arabiya television.
من منطقة أبو غريب غربي بغداد عبد القادر سعدي العربية.
شهدت جلسة مجلس النواب العراقي مناقشة.
The Iraqi parliament discussed the oil deals that were signed between the Kurdish regional government and foreign companies. The representative of the National Iraqi List, Wa'il Abdul Latif, criticized the attack by the Kurdish regional government against the Iraqi oil minister Hussein Shahristani after he cancelled the Kurdish regional government's oil deals. Latif demanded that the relationship between the regional and central Iraqi governments be regulated.
Many people may know that the Amariya province is the richest oil province in the world. If it can sign oil deals with foreign companies, then no one can tell other regions that they do not have the right to do the same. What are you going to do to the country? The fact that the Kurdish region has oil does not entitle it to sign oil deals with foreign companies. Otherwise, all Iraqi provinces that have oil would claim the same right. This will spread chaos in the country, and no one will be able to stop it. I warn that this will be very dangerous. The second point is that we should regulate the relationship between the central Iraqi government and the Kurdish region, because this will give a good impression of federalism as a system. We must understand that federalism means if a situation exists where the government has no relationship with the region and has no idea about what's going on there, then this will not be federalism. This would be a confederation.
من جهته أكد عضو التحالف الكردستاني عبد الخالق زنجانا.
The representative of the United Kurdistan Party, Abdel Khalid Zangana, said that the Kurdish regional government's decision to sign oil deals with foreign companies was constitutional. He said that the situation can only be resolved by applying the constitution. Zangana also said that the foreign aid that was provided to Iraq by leading countries must be distributed among all Iraqi provinces without favoritism.
دستورية وقانونية لمعالجة مثل هيك مشاكل إذا صار اختلاف بين الإقليم والحكومة.
I think legal and constitutional rules should be used to resolve problems when differences arise between one region and the central government. I support the Parliament Speaker in that this is a political issue and it must be resolved through the Constitution. This issue can also be resolved if political parties reach an agreement, like the law of justices and accountability or the oil law. Concerning the other point, being the Japanese loan, I believe that we must use these loans regardless of whether they come from Japan, Kuwait, or any other country. We should also be able to use these loans. We, the Kurds, were never against Japanese or British projects in Basra. We want all the projects to be divided equally amongst all Iraqis, from Zaku all the way to Kuwait. I'm using an old terminology. This is my own view, my brothers. Matters should not be discussed in this rigid manner, not even by the government, ministers, or parliament members. I hope that we address this thing in a normal manner through brotherly dialogue. Otherwise, we will create another problem for ourselves by jeopardizing the historical and brotherly relations between the Kurds and the Arabs.
نعمق الشرخ بين العلاقة التاريخية بين العرب والأكراد والأخوة التاريخية.
هذا وقتل أكثر من 40 امرأة في مدينة البصرة.
More than 40 women have been killed for not wearing the veil in the city of Basra over the past 5 months. Security forces said that extremist groups were responsible for these crimes.
لا مكان للسفور أو التبرج في البصرة بعد.
There is no room for unveiled women in Basra after today. Women have only one of two options, either to wear the veil or death. During the last 5 months, more than 40 women have been killed for not wearing the veil. Fear has taken a hold of the people of Basra, and there isn't a single girl or woman not wearing their veils.
I am one of those people who did not wear the veil because I am not convinced of it. I wore it because of the current conditions and because of fear. I did not want to expose myself to unnecessary problems.
God willing, we will not have a single unveiled girl in the college. Make all of them wear the veil.
Groups dressed in religious garb call themselves the Committee to enjoin what is just and forbid what is wrong. They sweep the streets and markets of Basra and say that their mission is to ensure that people are abiding by the religious dress code. Unveiled women are punished in public or in hiding, but either way, their bodies are thrown in the streets of the city. Some people believe that these committees belong to the Sadr movement, but a speaker from the movement denied this.
We're willing to protect women from being killed even if they are unveiled. We will tell them that their behavior is prohibited, but we will still protect them because killing them is a crime.
The rampant number of such crimes led the head of police in Basra to call on legal and humanitarian organizations to intervene and end the tragedy affecting women in the city.
We formed a committee to examine these crimes in order to discover the true reasons behind them. We ask that human rights organizations help us in our efforts.
The tribal leaders in Basra said that political factions in southern Iraq are imposing extremist Islamic rules and employing armed groups to instill fear in the hearts of the people to serve their political agendas.
The Sudanese government has rejected the U.S. pressure regarding the deployment of international forces in Darfur and accused Washington of meddling in its affairs. Khalid Sati reports from Khartoum.
The U.S. has renewed its threats of imposing sanctions on the Sudanese government. This news comes after Washington accused Khartoum of hampering the peace efforts in Darfur by rejecting the deployment of the joint forces there. Meanwhile, the U.S., through its ambassador in the UN, Zilmay Khalilzad, called on the Security Council to impose new sanctions on Sudan unless it accepts the deployment of the joint forces in Darfur. Meanwhile, the UN envoy in Darfur, Ian Ellison, said that the delay in the deployment of the joint forces is hampering the peace efforts in Darfur.
Many people do not believe in the conspiracy theory. In my opinion, all these events that started to unfold at the international arena since the start of the new millennium are indeed pointing towards an international conspiracy against Sudan. Unfortunately, the United States is leading this conspiracy with the collaboration of the United Nations. Since the collapse of the Eastern Pact and the rise of the United States as a dominant power in the world, one can no longer distinguish between the policies of the United Nations and those of the United States. Most conspiracies that are hatched in the world are either committed directly by the United States or channeled through the United Nations.
Parallel to the U.S. threats, the UN, through its Secretary General, called on the Sudanese government to show more cooperation and accept without delay the deployment of the United Nations African Union hybrid force in Darfur. The UN also called on the international community to mount pressure on Khartoum to hand over those accused of committing war crimes to the International Court of Justice. In an earlier statement, Khartoum rejected the UN demand and said it will not extradite any Sudanese for a trial outside the country.
This move by the UN comes at a time when the U.S. is taking similar steps against Sudan. It also comes at a time when the U.S. is gearing up for a presidential election campaign. The Darfur plight has become an important issue in the U.S. national and diplomatic agendas, as well as at the foreign policy level. Obviously, the U.S. is seeking to improve its image in the world. In order to do that, the U.S. is trying to mobilize diplomatic efforts around the world. However, Washington is bound to fail, as many U.S. senior officials who have tried to improve their country's image in the world have failed as well. In order to cover up for its failure, the U.S. is trying to divert the world's attention towards international and regional crises, including the situation in Darfur. The International Court of Justice, unfortunately, has been manipulated to serve this U.S. objective.
Meanwhile, the U.S. threats and intimidation against the Sudanese government were met by rejection and condemnation in Khartoum. In addition, the Sudanese government said that the U.S. justifications of continuing its campaign against Khartoum are not sustainable and they are baseless, and that Sudan has done more than it was required to do.
These resolutions led to further instability in the region and added more fuel to the fire instead of helping Darfur maintain stability.
Meanwhile, the Sudanese public expressed condemnation over the U.S. pressures on Khartoum. Some Sudanese described the U.S. pressures as an attempt by the U.S. to flex its power in order to besiege sovereign nations and governments, and they come in the context of a policy that is based on arrogance and superiority.
They are applying pressure on the Sudanese government in order to force it into accepting the deployment of the joint forces in Darfur. Khartoum has rejected the deployment and didn't sign for it in the Addis Ababa agreement.
Thank God, Sudan is full of resources, so let them impose their sanctions. These sanctions will not affect us, just like they didn't affect Syria, which is still standing in perseverance.
It is a conspiracy theory. This is what the Sudanese are saying here after the U.S. has threatened to use its bullying tactic against Khartoum. Khaled Satti, the Arab Republic of Syria television, Khartoum.
Resolution proposed by Iran on nuclear disarmament was overwhelmingly adopted by the UN General Assembly. The resolution, which is the second weapons disablement document put forth by Iran, has urged serious efforts to follow through the implementation to the letter of the NPT commitments by the nuclear weapons possessing countries. Iran has called on those countries in possession to take trust-building measures and cut back on their atomic stockpiles. The resolution, which passed the Assembly in defiance of the U.S. opposition, has highlighted the nuclear-armed nations to slash their tactical and non-strategic nukes. More revelations about skewed U.S. intelligence on Iran. White House Press Secretary Dana Perino has said the U.S. president had been well aware of the report for months prior to its release. She told a press conference that Mike McConnell, the director of the U.S. National Intelligence, had in August informed George W. Bush that Iran had halted its nuclear weapons program, but that the U.S. president insistently accused Iran of seeking an atom bomb. In another development, U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, who is the first American official to come clean over his country's embarrassment, admitted that the report by the 16 U.S. intelligence agencies has blocked America's bids to further sanction Tehran. And Chinese Foreign Minister Tang Jiaoxing, in a meeting with his British counterpart David Miliband, once again called for diplomatic settlement of Iran's nuclear case. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy repeated previous allegations against Iran, saying Tehran is still, quote, a danger, and urging continued pressure on the country's nuclear program. Merkel did not specifically express support for new UN sanctions resolution against Iran, but said, quote, we and our partners would like to continue with the UN process. Meanwhile, in the day, President Sarkozy said he continues to support the US-led push for sanctions, even after a U.S. intelligence report this week indicated that Iran has not pursued a nuclear weapons development.
The United States intelligence report on Iran released earlier this week stunned many Israelis. Joining us now from our Tel Aviv studio to discuss the controversial issue is Professor Barry Rubin, strategic analyst with the Gloria Center. Professor Rubin, thanks for coming in this evening.
Thank you.
Well, Ynet has quoted sources in the Bush administration who said the report apparently will not hurt the chances for a third round of tougher sanctions on Iran from the United Nations. Do you think that's accurate?
Yes, actually, I do. You know, we always have to be careful because you have the media and you have the intellectual debate and you have the op-eds. But what's really important is policy. And no government which has supported sanctions is saying that they're going to be affected by this. So I don't really see any effect. I mean, there are a lot of people who are trying to push for this and insist on this, but it doesn't seem to be happening. And there's some important reasons why. One is, not so sure the intelligence is good. I think Israeli intelligence sources are better. Secondly of all, people want to pull one line out of the whole report, and the report actually encourages the use of diplomacy and sanctions and pressures as an effective way to change Iran's course. And finally, I'll just say, look, you have an atomic bomb and you have the package it's put in. The hard part is putting in the fissile materials. And even the NIE report says that the Iranians are working on that. At most, they're not working so hard on the package to put it into because that's not such a big deal. That's the easy part. So there are a lot of politically motivated people who are trying to blow this up into something that it isn't.
Professor Rubin, is it possible that the Bush administration, painfully aware of its own limitations and failures in the diplomatic arena, is simply throwing up its hands saying they've lost the standoff with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad?
Well, they're not saying that, most clearly not. When you're dealing with what seems to be incompetence, basically, then you can then ascribe many motives to it. But I don't think they did this deliberately because it's very embarrassing to them. If they wanted to do it, they would have hinted at it in their diplomacy. We probably don't have time to effectively analyze why this happened within the context of U.S. policy, but clearly they're not changing their policy, so I don't think this is an excuse to do so. I think it's actually a badly written two-line sentence, which if it had been written appropriately would have read something like, they may have stopped working on the bomb casing, but what's most important is to get nuclear material that can be used in a bomb, and they're working on that as fast as they can.
Professor Rubin, for about a year or so, everybody's been talking about the military option is on the table. An analyst today, after the report was issued with the Council on Foreign Relations, said the military option is not just off the table, it's out the window. Would you agree?
First of all, I mean, I've been told by good sources for 2 years that the U.S. under the Bush administration had no intention of attacking Iran. I don't think there was ever any chance of attacking Iran. But viewers may be interested in a little inside information here. I mean, the Council on Foreign Relations is producing a report at this moment on dealing with Iran and Syria. Virtually nobody against engagement was invited to participate. The report was written before the study group meetings were held. Now, they may deny this, but this is political pressure to change U.S. policy, to appease Iran, to try to buy off Syria. This is not a good policy. And there's a lot of manipulation going on to try to push in this direction. But that's not the policy of the U.S. government.
Professor Barry Rubin, strategic analyst with the Gloria Center. Always great to have you with us, Professor Rubin. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
The implications of the presidential election crisis appear to have clearly affected many sectors just before the holidays.
Contrary to previous years, it seems that this year the Christmas and New Year's holidays will be welcomed with less enthusiasm, as is evident by the bare streets. People are waiting for the president to be elected before confirming their hotel reservations.
There are many unconfirmed reservations. This is due to the lack of security and political stability in Lebanon, as well as the presidential elections. We could reach 70 to 80% of our potential capacity if a president is elected before the holidays.
The chairman of the board for Middle East Airlines, Mohammed Al-Khut, confirmed in a telephone interview that reservations have remained the same for the past 2 months. That means that during the holiday season, which also happens to include the Islamic holiday Eid al-Adha, everyone is waiting for stability before traveling to Beirut. Holidays usually begin with decorative trees. However, the number of trees that have been imported this year have declined from 5,000 to only 700.
Business owners are not decorating the streets. Very few of them ordered Christmas trees. For this reason, the trees are really expensive and almost all of them are coming in fully grown. The prices are also high because of the difference between the euro and the dollar.
There has also been a decline in imported toys, which are the joy of the holidays for children. Stability today will mean a better tomorrow.
We order the goods that we bring every year. We would like to bring in more variety, but we are cautious because we do not know what the economic and political situation in the country will be like tomorrow.
This year, 100% of the Christmas plants, which decorate homes, businesses, and even the streets, are grown in Lebanon. Out of 300,000 seedlings, only 200,000 were planted.
The best types are being grown, and they are competitive with a foreign product. I do not think that any of the seedlings come from abroad. All of them are produced 100% locally and nationally. God willing, it will be good for everyone.
Businesses are ordering only half of their supplies. They're afraid of being hit by the security and economic situation.
Everyone is waiting for stability and the election of the new president. For the first year, the Lebanese may be welcoming the new year amidst less enthusiasm.
One nation, many voices. The stories of Muslims in America. At work, at play, having fun. What is life like for the millions of people in this country who practice Islam?
And then finally I looked in my heart. Even today, Muslims still
kind of in limbo.
Now's your chance to share stories of Muslims in America in our One Nation, Many Voices online film contest. We're awarding $50,000 in cash prizes divided among 6 categories: comedy, drama, documentary, animation or music, a special category for filmmakers 18 and under, plus films under 60 seconds long. You don't have to be a Muslim to enter or to vote for your favorite films online. You just have to live in the United States. The new deadline for entries is December 31st, 2007, so hurry. Check out details at linktv.org/OneNation. One Nation, Many Voices. Muslims in America. Stories, not stereotypes.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.